In memoir, as in life, one of the biggest factors that makes advice good or bad is whether the context is aligned. But as you move through the process of writing your memoir, that context is going to change dramatically. And that's why today I want to go through the 5 stages of writing your memoir with advice on how to make sure you have got the context right throughout the process. Stay tuned. Most memoirs don't stall because of lack of time. Most memoirs stall because of lack of clarity. And that's why I put together the Memoir Method Checklist. The idea here is to give you every single step in the process, not because that makes it easy, of course not, but because no project is ever completed until you know what the steps in the process actually are. You can download it free at pageandpodium.com/checklist. I was on a call with a woman a couple of weeks ago, and she was just expressing some frustration with basically the internet, same, where she was saying as she watches and listens to all of these different advice shows on memoir, she noticed that every single piece of advice seemed like it contradicted some other piece of advice she had just heard. Now, I bet that that is familiar to a lot of y'all out there, so I wanted to kind of give some thought to why that would be. Because while there are infinite ways to approach this process of writing your memoir, they really should not be actually in direct competition in most cases. And certainly I will tell you that in our podcast, in this podcast, I make a huge effort to make sure that I am giving you enough context that you can really understand whether a particular piece of advice is for you, but as I teased in the opening of this video, also whether that piece of advice is for you now. And the more I kind of thought about that conversation that I'd had with that woman, the more I realized that in our group program, the Memoir Method, which is just a group coaching program that both teaches and provides accountability to women writing their first memoirs, one of the most frequent things that we are clarifying in that program is what to do at this stage. So when you are in the drafting phase, when you are getting that memoir down on paper, obviously you have a different goal than when you move into the editing phase. But I do find that it is not all that clear all the time where and what you should be focused on at these different stages of the process. Now, I have mentioned on here before, but not often enough, that one of my major baseline foundational concerns when I founded this company, this podcast, the group program, all of it, was I never wanted anybody to work with me and then end up feeling like they didn't know what to do next. I had seen this all the time in my freelancing work as a ghostwriter. I would write a beautiful book alongside a client. They would really feel like I had nailed the voice and the vision. They were so excited about the manuscript. But because I was then only a ghostwriter, I wasn't really sure what to tell them to do. I didn't know where to direct them next. So as part of Page and Podium, what I wanted to do was build out the entire process so that if folks chose to invest their trust in me, in my company, as part of putting their memoir together, they would never feel stranded or abandoned. And that is why all of my programs take you through all the stages. And I wanted today to really take a moment to break down what those stages are so that if you are not someone who needs that direct support of working directly with a publisher, with a coach, with a ghostwriter, that you still will be able to pick apart the pieces of advice that you are gathering from these various sources to make the best decision for your book. Okay, so with that said, I want to give you first just kind of a general way to think about moving through these stages before we go into each of the 5 with not only some kind of contextual considerations, but I also have my number 1 tip for each of these stages coming up. So be sure you follow all the way through. We're going to be moving through to the editing process, and then I will leave you to look for the publishing stuff elsewhere on this channel. Okay, so first to give you this general rule of thumb. Anytime you are thinking about the process of actually writing the memoir, So from the stage that you are now, whatever that might be, all the way through having a finished, completed manuscript, you always want to be thinking from the general level down to the specific level. So that is to say, when you first start out, when you're first thinking about, oh, could I write a memoir? Should I write a memoir? What would it be like? That is the most general. There is, in fact, not a specific in sight, which is part of what makes this stage really uniquely challenging. Now, as you move through, just to give you a little preview, the development, the writing, the revising, and the editing, that's the 5 stages we're going to be talking about today. One thing that you should see happening is that just naturally, as you move through the progression, you should be moving into gradually more specific stages as you go. So whereas that kind of dreamy stage at the beginning, anything could happen, anything goes. Really, we are trying to stretch and include as much as possible. We're gradually honing down what we're looking at. So we're getting a little more specific when we move into development. This is the part where you will make your outline and plan. As you are moving into that stage, you're starting to dial in, be a little bit more specific. When you move into drafting, we're getting more specific still, revising and editing to the absolute most specific word choice level. So as you're moving through the process, kind of try to keep that in mind. We're beginning with a very, very general viewpoint, but the goal is to move down so that we are looking at smaller and smaller pieces of the pie as we move forward. What that allows us to do is keep some kind of order and steadiness. If we were just constantly writing and revising that writing, and then writing more, and then revising that, and then going back to the first stuff, we would just be moving back and forth between the big picture and the small picture. And it's really, really hard on our brains to do that. So if we can instead move through in these much more orderly stages, we're really able to make sure we didn't miss anything. We've got the time for the general, we've got the time for the specific, and I find that that can actually be really reassuring to realize that you do not have to have everything figured out all the time. We just need to make sure we're focused on the right thing at the right time, and everything will come into place in its own time. Okay, so with that in mind, as I move through these stages, just keep in mind that the general rule of thumb I'm going for here is general to specific. And with that, let's start with what I think is actually the most fun part, and that is the dreaming stage. Now, I really wanted to include the dreaming stage here, even though this may or may not technically be part of the writing process. I do find that this dreaming phase is really, really important for the women that I work with. And the main thing that you need to be thinking about at this very most general stage is not exactly the thing that you're going to want to think about. Oftentimes, I find that people really want to think about things like the title or what the cover design will be, or whether they want some kind of a symbolic turn or something woven through that will be really interesting and artsy. And all of those things can fit in the dreaming stage. But really what you are doing in this stage is figuring out who you want to be at the other end of that book. Now, I said this in an intentionally provocative way because, of course, there are many, many options to answer this question, including basically the same person I am now, just having written a book. But the reason I throw this out here is that I find that a lot of people don't make progress from the dreaming stage, not because they don't know what to do, not even really because they don't have accountability, but because they do not allow themselves to lean into what the dream really is. Now, let me say this in a slightly different way. When we think about writing a book, yes, we are thinking about writing a book. We're often thinking about a book launch or holding the book in our hands or telling friends and family, maybe doing interviews in different media locations about that book. But what we are really thinking about when we decide we want to write a book is who we will be on the other end of that process. So that can be anything from someone who is very much like myself now, but who has a much, much richer understanding of the experiences that I went through. It could be someone who's pretty much like I am now, but I have a much, much clearer sense of what my actual expertise is, what I've learned over those years of my life, what I've learned both formally and informally, how they fit together. But oftentimes the women that I work with really want something bigger. We just don't often admit it. And in this stage, we've gotta admit it. So what does this sometimes sound like? Well, sometimes during the dreaming stage, we're thinking, could I be a writer? Could I be someone for whom this is not just a hobby? Could I be someone for whom this is a calling or a profession or a career change? Could I be someone whose job it is to communicate with others through writing? A really close relative to this, oftentimes I find that folks are not as focused on professional writing, but more on professional thought leadership. So this is so exciting to me because this really is where my heart is. This is the reason that I started writing books for myself. A lot of my early clients were very, very clearly focused on platform building, visibility building. And often when we think about writing that book, one of the things we're hoping will happen at the other end is that we will have the authority, we will have the heft to be able to share our ideas and have them listened to. And the good news is, writing a book will do this. Writing a book does this almost every time. If you have a quality book that is well written, well edited, that has been published professionally, very, very often, more often than not, certainly, you will be seen as an authority in a way that you weren't before you had that book, or in a way that you aren't outside of the context of that book. But just like any of the other goals that we might have for our book, we've got to acknowledge that that's where we want to go, and that happens during this dream stage. So how does that fit in with my advice that we're moving from general to specific? Because of course, when we're thinking about these kind of career outcomes, these goals related to things like mental health, relational health, financial health, when we're thinking about these things, they are specific. But the reason that I really wanted to put this into the framework, and the reason it actually is general, is I find that what happens is where folks should be making these goals, who they want to be at the end of the book, we really get drawn into these specifics, things that are way down the line. Not only things like, how do I want my book to look and read, all the way to the publishing part, but also things like, what kind of voice do I need? Who do I admire as a writer and who do I not like? Oftentimes, I find that we distract ourselves with more specific things than we need to at this dreaming stage. And what can often happen is that because we do not allow ourselves to do this general dreaming of what our life could be like, we end up with a memoir that never really gets started. Now, sure, maybe you've jotted down some outline ideas, maybe you've watched a whole bunch of YouTube videos, maybe you've even written some chapters out. But often I find that skipping this dreaming portion really shortchanges us, and it keeps us from moving forward the way we need to because we are so concerned about the details. So, my piece of advice during this first stage is ask yourself what you want the book to do. But don't ask yourself what you want the book to do for your readers. We are absolutely going to focus on our readers, but in the dreaming stage, even readers are too specific. I want you instead to ask yourself, what do you want this book to do for you? Otherwise, it will be incredibly difficult to move forward at all, but almost impossible to move forward to that point at some point. Oftentimes, if you delay thinking about what you want to do with the book, it means that you have also delayed thinking about what is motivating the book. And of course, that motivation is one of the most important things as we move into the next stage, which is development. Now, I often encourage clients to think about the development stage as a 10,000-foot view. When we are in development, we're more specific than that dream stage, but we are still trying to really see the shape of the book from a high-up view, from a little bit further away, from, again, more general than certainly when we are going to be into the drafting stage. Now, earlier I mentioned that this stage is essentially our outlining and planning stage because that is the goal. By the end of this stage, you want to have a helpful outline, an outline that has enough detail that it will tell you what you are doing moving forward. And in that way, the way that I encourage my clients to think about it, your outline becomes a sort of plan. Of course, you're still going to have to think about things like your writing routine that will require some other types of life planning. But as we put this outline together, we really have put together a set of instructions for ourselves of how we are going to move through once we move down even one more level into a more specific way of thinking about things. Now, the biggest mistake that people make here is very similar to the dreaming stage, which is that oftentimes folks will either try to skip the development stage, oh, do not do this, or they will try to rush it. And I want to focus on that second one because if you're here, I don't think you probably are trying to skip the development stage, but it's worth talking about the idea of slowing down to speed up. And this is how I prefer to think about outlining every single time. Does outlining always take way longer than you think it will? Yes. Is your outline likely to change at least a little, but probably a little more than a little? Yes, absolutely. And yet, it is worth slowing down to make sure that you have a really clear sense of the road ahead. That is going to help you move forward as much as that motivation we established in the previous step. So, don't skip your development, and instead we really need to slow down a bit and think about what we want for our structure. So, as you wrap up this stage, again, make sure that you've got an outline and make sure that you really feel good about that outline. Even though, as I teased a bit ago, your outline may shift a little bit, even though, as I teased a little bit ago, you may need to change some of that plan, and you probably will at some point. It is so worth it to slow down and take the time to get your development right. Now, I will take just a quick minute, just give me a couple seconds to plug our group program because we are so solid on this part and I'm so proud of it. When you come into our group program, the Memoir Method, we have the entire development stage set up in a step-by-step process. So every single step of that development, everything from getting your ideas all dumped out of your head onto paper, to figuring out what your topic is, to refining and getting feedback on your message, to laying out how your narrative arc is going to move your reader through the story, to even preparing that outline in the way that is going to serve you best. You have step-by-step videos, templates, and worksheets, plus the support of not only coaches who have done this many times, but also others in the group who have been through it themselves. It is gold, y'all. I cannot plug it enough. But whether you are working with us to develop your outline or working on your own, this is a stage that you've got to really give the time to. Yes, it takes a little longer than it feels like it should. Yes, some of it is a little bit temporary or hesitant, but we've got to have a plan. We have to have somewhere to start. Okay, so as you are moving into your development into the third stage, which is drafting, you are armed with this outline. And the beauty of the outline as you move into drafting is that you now have a document that will hold on to that 10,000 foot view as you are heading down even further into the weeds. With drafting, we really are taking our first big step forward into specificity. And that can be scary, but it also is so exhilarating. So as we are moving forward into drafting, that outline lays out the path for us, but the goal of this stage is actually just to create a bunch of clay. Now let me dig into this metaphor because we really like this in the group program. We find that it's really helpful for folks. When we think about the drafting process, the biggest mistake that I see people make, and the biggest understandable temptation, to be clear, is to write a chapter and then immediately go back into that chapter and fix it. Now, you can probably see where this is going, because once we have our chapter down, we could endlessly fix it without pushing ourselves to move on to the next and the next and the next and the next chapter. In fact, that happens so frequently that it is very often the reason that people come to me asking for help in the first place. So I don't want you to fall into this trap. Instead, when we're drafting, we need to think about producing enough clay, not for one chapter, but enough clay, enough raw material to work with for the whole entire book. Now, there's a couple reasons for this, because I can see that some folks will push back a little bit and say, well, but why don't I, if I know how to fix the chapter, why don't I just go ahead and fix it? And the answer is in the question. The answer is you actually do not know how to fix the chapter until you have all of the chapters drafted. Unfortunately, as tempting as it is to think of each of our chapters as a little self-contained unit, in reality, our chapters all work together. And very often, as you keep writing, as you keep creating that clay, we're going to sculpt it more later. As you keep creating that clay, one thing you will find is that things you wanted to fix in that earlier chapter don't actually need to be fixed. As you move through the book, you find the solution later. As you move through the book, the solution changes. So what we are doing in our drafting stage is not producing a finished product. Rather, we are using that outline to guide us as we create this massive amount of clay that is organized. We knew what we were doing when we put the clay in the particular places we put it in, but we also know that it's clay. It's not a sculpture yet. We're just getting things down so that we can evaluate, so that we can be more certain of the revisions we need to make as you move into the revision stage. And my biggest piece of advice here is that you continue to think about your outline, but think about the process that you are taking, moving through the outline into your draft with the understanding that revision is coming next. Now, my right hand and co-coach in the Memoir method, Emily Thrash, has such a beautiful way of thinking about this, and I want to make sure I throw it in here because this really is the ultimate piece of advice for drafting. Think of your outline as a plan for an international vacation. Now, if you have ever been on an international vacation, any kind of a big vacation that you might go on, you are probably going to spend at least some time up front planning the activities you want to do. Now, this is going to be everything from where do you want to stay? Are there restaurants that you might need a reservation for that you need to go ahead and make in advance? Do you want tickets to any kind of an event, a play, a concert? What are the things that you need to lay out in advance to make sure you don't get to that vacation and then miss out on all the stuff you wanted to do? But at the same time, you could have the most beautiful vacation plan. And if you land in that international space and find that there is a beautiful, amazing, exciting, dream come true event happening at that time, well, nobody in their right mind would tell you to skip that event because you have a plan, right? Instead, we would say, well, let's look at our plan. How might it make sense to alter a little bit now that we have this new information, now that we're here and we see the opportunities that we have that we didn't know about in advance? Well, of course, we need to be adaptable with a big vacation plan, but that doesn't mean we don't plan at all, right? It means that we need to make sure that our plan leaves us room to explore. And that is exactly the mindset that you need as you move out of outlining and through your draft. You are producing clay. We need opportunities, we need inspiration, we need creativity to produce that clay. That doesn't mean we abandon our plan, but rather it means that we give ourselves some balance between sticking to our plan because we know it'll work, and giving ourselves the leeway, the leverage to move around and explore and make discoveries. Okay, so as you move through the drafting stage, I will say the drafting stage is typically the longest, depending on how revisions go, but the drafting stage is pretty long and you will be at it for a while. So stick to it, you can do it, and eventually you get to the very, very exciting step of moving out of drafting and into revision. Now, here is where that huge pile of clay we created during the drafting phase gets to actually be shaped. We're actually making it into something that is quite beautiful. It's not going to be polished yet, but we are shaping it so that it is structurally very, very strong, so that all of the pieces are working clearly together, so that we make sure that we have very intentional mini arcs set up throughout our book, as well as the larger narrative arc. In revision, the magic happens. Now, I want to go ahead and skip forward in this stage to my number one piece of advice, because this piece of advice falls at the beginning of the revision stage. And this piece of advice is, I want you to start your revision by creating a reverse outline. Now, I have a few different videos. You can go back through the YouTube channel. You could look at our blog, pageandpodium.com/blog, or anywhere that you're listening to podcasts. You can look through our past episodes. And I have talked specifically about how to begin revising your memoir several times. That is the same kind of material that I'm covering here. But the one tool that I really want to make sure you don't miss is this reverse outline. So, what's a reverse outline? Well, when you finish drafting, you will have both the outline you originally created and a manuscript that probably matches that outline about 80% or so. Well, now we've got to figure out, where did you make those discoveries? Where did you go off plan? And how did that affect the overall shape of the book? Because again, everyone is going to go off plan. That's a good thing, actually. But now we've got to wrangle together the ways you went off plan with the original. With a reverse outline, you are not looking at your outline. Instead, you're looking at your manuscript. What you're going to do is go through that manuscript section, chunk by chunk, and write down what you are seeing in each of those sections. Now, by the time you finish doing that with your whole entire manuscript, you have effectively a de facto outline, right? You have an outline that we know matches the manuscript. And the magic of that is we have now moved from the original outline at that 10,000-foot view down into the weeds of the draft, and then back up into, again, that larger view with the reverse outline. Except now we have both the high-up view and the close-up view. That is so, so useful. The hardest thing as you start revising is deciding what revisions to make. And oftentimes, folks will start doing editing, spoiler alert, that is the next stage, instead of revising, because they aren't able to see how the manuscript, the in the weeds version, matches or doesn't match the 10,000-foot version. By doing this reverse outline, you should start to see, and a coach will be helpful here, but you should start to see places where things are not working the way that you hoped they would. You should start to see places where something feels a little bit weak, something feels a little draggy, something feels hand-wavy, like you didn't go enough detail into it. And during the revision stage, we're going to use our reverse outline to figure out what we want to change in the manuscript itself. Now, because this is kind of the least defined stage, I'm not going to belabor it any longer, other than to say, you do want to make sure that you're being very intentional, that you're not blending stage 4, revision, with stage 5, editing. So let's move into stage 5 editing so that you know to avoid it during the revision part. When you move into the editing stage, you have now completed the entire gambit from the very high level 10,000-foot view, the star view of the dreaming stage, all the way through the specifics and the specifics and the specifics until finally you have landed at the part where you get to make the beautiful word choices, where you get to shape your sentences and make them beautiful and poetic or pithy and short, whatever it is that you like in reading. This is the part everybody loves, where you get to go and play with the different words and play with the page. The thing that's important to note is once you start playing with the words, any changes you make structurally, any larger changes to the flow of the manuscript, may or may not be worth making. Oftentimes, during the revision stage, pieces will be cut entirely, rewritten entirely. And if we have already gone in and done the word and sentence level tweaks, we've now wasted a good amount of time on things that are going to be cut or moved and have to be re-edited anyway. So we want to save that very close-up revision for our editing stage. We want to save all of those sentence and word choice decisions for this latest editing phase. And here is where my number one piece of advice for the editing stage comes in, and that is to say, do not start editing until you are certain that the shape of the manuscript is how you want it. And for most people, this means that between revision and editing, you will want to hire a professional. Now, there's a couple of different ways that this can look. Sometimes people will call it a developmental edit. That's the more traditional way of thinking about this. At Page and Podium, if you come to us, we have a little different perspective on this, as with many things. So we offer a manuscript review instead. And the only difference there is with a developmental, we're going to be getting kind of a lot of big picture, but much more specific stuff within the manuscript, much more stuff that feels a little more like editing than revision. With a manuscript review, we really are focused on the structure. We know that that's where most writers, at least most writers that follow us, tend to struggle, is with confidence that their structure is strong, confidence that the manuscript as a whole is good. So we find that offering a service that's a little bit quicker turnaround, a little bit more efficient, a little bit more affordable, is going to allow our folks to feel really comfortable that their revisions are solid and complete so that they can move into the editing phase. Either way, whether you choose a developmental edit, a manuscript review, or some other approach, the piece of advice here is just to make sure that you are totally done, that you feel totally happy with your revision stage before you start tweaking words or sentences at all. It's going to be much, much more efficient if you can wait until you can sign off on your revisions and then do all your edits all at once. Even though I know the editing is so fun, play in there if it feels good. Just know that the most efficient way forward is to finish revisions first, get some kind of a professional review, and then move forward into the editing stage. Okay, well, when I say these 5 stages just one after another, it sounds so easy, right? But in reality, this is quite an adventure that you are embarking into. It takes most people at least a year, oftentimes substantially longer than that. If you would like to make sure that you are moving through the process as efficiently as possible, with as much control as possible, with as much support and accountability as possible, I hope you'll reach out. We always have openings in our group program, the Memoir Method. We keep our cohorts really small so that folks are always getting a chance to ask their questions on the live call, as well as get that one-on-one personalized email feedback during the week as well. So when you are in this program, you really will feel taken care of. You really feel confident that the next step you're making is the right step, and you never have to be poking around YouTube trying to figure out what you're supposed to be doing. You have got people in your back pocket who have done this a time or two to help guide you through the steps in the best way possible. Okay, if that sounds good to you, you can head over to pageandpodium.com/memoir-method. Read a little bit more about our program and book a call to speak with me. That is a call that you'll be on with me. You can ask any questions. We'll make sure you're a really, really good fit. And if you are, I will encourage you to join that program and hang out with us. Write your memoir with a group of like-minded women. It's so fun. We have such a good time, and I'm so proud of the work that folks do in that group. Okay. With that said, whatever stage you are in, I hope that it's going well. I hope you're feeling good, and I hope you are starting to see some of those dream aspirations materialize in more and more real, concrete, specific ways every single day. Can't wait to hear from you, hear how your book is going, and until then, happy writing. Most memoirs don't fail for lack of time. They fail for lack of clarity, because their author is trying to move forward in a process that is unfamiliar and unclear, with no one to support their efforts. And that's why I put together something very practical, the Memoir Method Checklist. This is designed to give you every single step in the process, so you not only know what you need to work on now, you know what's coming next, and after that, until you have that beautiful published book in your hands. You can download it now at pageandpodium.com/checklist.